Aisha was not comparable to anyone her age. Not in her time period and not now.
Ah, she was a grown-up child. Oh, that makes it much better. She was this intellectual child prodigy. She's so special that she was exceptionally, she was so special that Muhammad alone had the ability to do the woogie boogie with her. That's your argument, dude? Are you like... These people, they take us for idiots. They literally take us for idiots. They think we're stupid. So what do we do with the marriage of Aisha? Well, you see, this is something that keeps coming up time and time again for Muslim da'is, people that promote Islam. Anyone that speaks about Islam as being the most upright moral guide for humanity, Muhammad being the best moral character that ever existed, has to deal with this thorn. The fact is, this keeps coming up because it's troubling. It's an extreme example of something that is problematic. The reason it's problematic is because, I mean, we don't even need to say why. You have a 6-year-old girl with a 53-year-old man, okay? And this is supposed to be the best example. So, over here, we have a Muslim convert who goes by the name Shahid Bolsen. This guy converted to Islam and became this sort of radical guy that's like promoting Islamism and trying to bash the West, incessantly bashing the West. Now, you're going to notice that in his tone. He's trying to be like a Malcolm X type character, like the West this and the West that. We're going to see that. We're going to see him saying this thing and pointing the finger at, you know, you guys are terrible. You guys, you do all these terrible things. And he's going to find the worst examples of things that exist among us society and use this as an example to say the whole thing is bad. Let's take a look at Shahid, not his real name, that's his convert name. Let's take a look at what he had to say and why I think he got it totally wrong.
Regularly reminded, again, of James Baldwin. There's a speech that you can hear from him when he was at the press club in Washington, D.C., and he was talking about how in America and in the West, he was talking specifically about America, but it sort of applies throughout the West, that you think simplicity, simple-mindedness is a virtue, and you are distrustful of complexity, you're distrustful of nuance, you're distrustful of anything that is hard to understand or that can't be understood in 5 seconds. You know, you always want to get to the bottom line. Never mind whether or not whatever is at the bottom line can only be understood when you read the whole page.
So this was kind of a preamble to set the stage, to set the tone for this complexity, as he's trying to put it. Oh, this complex issue. Well, let's be honest. Isn't simple-mindedness, simplicity, isn't that what Islam demands from its followers? Just believe. Just accept it. Don't think about it. Don't question it. This guy's the best, and let's just go with that. That's the exact opposite of what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we have a simple problem, and they're the ones coming with a complex solution. The solution is, there is no solution. This is a bad thing that happened that Muhammad did.
Marriage of Aisha. Right. That's the favorite talking point, you know? It's like when all else fails in their arguments against Islam, they bring up child marriage, the marriage of Rasulullah to Aisha. It's like...
It's not when all else fails. Like everything else has a valid... There are valid points all throughout Islamic criticism. And this is like one of them. It's not like Islam is this impenetrable fortress and the only thing left now is to attack his morality. Well, his morality is, you know, right there and center. It's integral to the whole narrative of this perfect man, supposed perfect man, right? So let's hear what he has to say.
The last stone that you have to throw in your hand, the silver bullet, your prophet married a child. Okay. With all of these types of comments and questions, and in this one, there's an incredible amount of deviousness going on here. When people ask this, I know what they're up to. And it also reveals the extent to which the Western culture has alienated people from basic understanding about being humans?
No, this has nothing to do with Western culture. Many Muslims, even non-Western Muslims, maybe Muslims in the Arabic world and the Middle East or whatever, they also wonder, like, whoa, this is weird, right? It's nothing to do with the West. Although, to be fair, the West doesn't allow child marriage. Something he's going to get into. He's going to start accusing the West of promoting the P word and child marriage. Let's see.
So, in the West, they constantly need to be told what's moral or immoral by means of laws and regulations. Even if those laws and regulations, change arbitrarily on a regular basis.
Well, okay, well, first of all, isn't that the whole thing about Islam, is being arbitrarily told what's right and wrong by some supposed divine being that revealed a book in the 7th century to Muhammad? Right? Like, he's not even, and then he's saying, they change it. We arbitrarily change it. Yes, we adjust based on evidence and we look at the situation at the time. And in fact, Islamic law has that too, right? Islamic law changes as well based on the time. But anyways, I'm not going to get into that level of nuance here. But the fact is that changing laws is a good thing. You adjust and you improve, right? You look at the data and you see the effectiveness, right? Like, if you find, for example, that like hanging people is not a deterrent, then you stop hanging people because it's not effective. You do something else, right? Like, that's the point I'm trying to make. Don't get fixated on the example. It's just an example, but that's my point. Change is good. It's not necessarily bad. Change in itself is not always good, but it can be good, right? So this legalism he's talking about, this is Islam. This is 100% Islam.
Even though those laws, oddly enough, are being written by the least trusted people in the society. I mean, the politicians who make these laws are regularly regarded in polling by the public as the least trusted and least moral people in the society.
Well, first of all, there's a system behind how laws and government and all of these things are made. It's not a simple thing that, it's not like a dictator comes and just says whatever he wants or she wants. There's a process of how these laws are formed. There are expert analysis brought in. There's, police are talked to. There's a process, right, where the law is determined based on the way that things are going. It's not just some like terrible guy that you hate comes up with a law. No, there's a process where it has to be voted in by the majority or so many votes or whatever. Like, it's different from country to country. But it's not like he's saying it. It's not that these corrupt, terrible people that nobody likes are making the laws. I mean, look at Trump. Trump was a popular leader, right? He was very popular. People loved him. A lot of people loved him. And he made he did a bunch of things that some people didn't like, some people liked. But they voted for him. They gave him that power to do those things, right? To push back against China, whatever he was doing, right? These things, we use our government, we use our politicians because that's the way democracy works. Do you have a better alternative? No, you don't. What does Islam provide? What sort of alternative does Islam provide? It doesn't provide a coherent ideology for governance. A bunch of Sahaba, secretly voted for some guy, and while this other guy was taking care of the Prophet and trying to get him buried, Ali, these other guys are like, oh, let's make the next caliph, while the guy wasn't even buried yet. He never told, his companions who was supposed to be the next leader. It's just a mess. There was like big wars being fought when the Prophet died. Like, what is the alternative you're coming with? Like, what is your alternative? You're complaining about this. And I'm going to go back and point the finger at your Islamic law, your Hadith and your Quran. It's not enough to come up with a law. You need some jurisprudence. You need some man-made thinking. I'm going to call it like human thinking, human effort. Well, guess where that comes from? Human beings, right? Imam Shafi, Imam Hanafi, right? All of these imams, when they came up with these rules of jurisprudence, where do you think they came up with them from? Whether to use qiyas, analogy, or whether to use the norms and the morals of the people of Medina, like Imam Malik did, right? Or whether to use less hadith or more hadith, like Imam Abu Hanifa used less hadith because he was more skeptical of hadith because there was a lot of forgery going on. You think all of this, none of this is, do you think all of this comes from God? No, it's human beings trying to do their best. So again, what you are doing is you're comparing two systems, one of which is completely based on the needs of human beings, and the other one, which is Islam, which is based on some random things that someone said 1400 years ago, and trying to use that as a way to know how to live a life today. Which system do you think is going to have better outcomes, Mr. Shahid, so-called Shahid?
But when they say something is illegal, you take it as a moral absolute. Illegal means immoral.
Isn't that what Islam is all about? Haram is bad, right? Haram is evil. Haram is forbidden. Haram is punished by Allah. You're doing the same thing. And that's not even necessarily the case with laws. Some laws are there to facilitate a good life, right? Some laws are related to morality, like you shouldn't beat your wife, for example. That's illegal. That's illegal in many countries, right? We made that illegal. Marital rape is illegal as well, right? All of these things that don't exist, these laws don't exist under Islam, these sort of things. These are related to ethics, but not all laws are related to ethics necessarily. Some of them are just to make society function better, but they're not necessarily right or wrong. There's just rules that we set in order for harmony. The most obvious example is traffic laws. We also have, like, for example, tax laws, right? Zoning laws. Not all these laws are related to morality, but to help society function.
And when they legalize something, it means it's morally fine. You take your fatwas on morality from your politicians, even though you don't trust them as far as you could throw them. But why would you do that? The reason you...
Well, that's not true either. Even bad politicians can come up with good laws. Even politicians that I personally don't like can come up with laws to protect children, right? Like children protection laws. Well, I might not like the politician, but what he's doing is a genetic fallacy. You can't just say because you don't like someone that everything they say is wrong.
You do that is because you trust yourself even less. You trust the politicians on morality more than you trust yourself. And you trust your neighbors even less than you trust yourself. You don't trust that you have enough moral sense to make the right decision on your own. So you defer to politicians in Washington who you yourself regard as criminals. You defer to them to tell you right from wrong. So because...
That's not how it works, man. We add laws so that we can have harmony in society, right? Yes, I trust my neighbors, but if my neighbors don't behave themselves, there's laws. That's the point of laws, buddy. Laws make society work better, because without laws, there'll be chaos and anarchy, and we don't want that, right? Steven Pinker talked about the Leviathan theory in his book, Better Angels, how having a functioning government drastically dropped murder rates and like crime rates because you have a central government that's making sure the society functions. This is how societies evolved. Like this guy wants to go back to the dark ages of like, oh yeah, I trust my neighbor and I trust everybody and I don't need laws. Like, well, that's the straw man he's making, even though he doesn't believe that either, because Islam is even worse. It's like chop off the hands and so, like stone the adulterer. Like, what is he criticizing here? Like, everything he's saying about the West is even worse in Islam.
Because you don't have enough sense, or anyway, you don't have enough trust in your sense to, for example, evaluate the maturity level of young people, you said that everyone is a child until they turn 18. Means that someone could literally be just one day shy of their 18th birthday, but they're a child all the way up until midnight. And then poof, suddenly they're an adult when the clock strikes 12. Obviously, this doesn't make any sense to anyone, but you...
Well. That is not at all how it works, man. In order to create laws, you have to have a cutoff. You can't just leave it willy-nilly. So the cutoff is 18, right? It's called the age of consent, right? The reason we have to pick an age, we have to pick an age for voting, we have to pick an age for all of these things, is because how else would you have laws around it? Obviously, nobody thinks that there's a magical thing that happens when you turn 18 that you suddenly become a man. No, it doesn't work like that. Obviously, we don't believe that. Nobody believes that. Some people will be mature at 17. Some people will be mature at 16. But we set the age at 18 for the protection of these people, of these children that are just becoming adults, right? These laws are there to protect kids, right? Or emerging adults. Yes, sure, some people will be ready before that. But the point is, the 18 number is not magic. It's just the best It's the best we can do that sort of deals with this transitional period, right? Between childhood and adulthood, right? So we pick a number. The number is 18. We're going to get into this in more detail later. The age is not 18. The age of consent is not 18 everywhere. But we'll get into that because he's going to bring that up.
You need a standard. You need a rule. Because without it, you wouldn't trust your own common sense. This is a breakdown of moral reason in the West and of human understanding.
So he's saying because we have a minimum age of consent, we don't, like, this is a breakdown of morality. Yo, what nonsense is this guy saying? The minimum age is a child protection law. It's to protect kids that haven't developed the cognitive abilities, that don't have the foresight that can be taken advantage of by usually older men and younger women, taking advantage of younger women that don't understand how the world works. They don't understand the implications. They don't have that, long-term cognitive thinking. Their brains haven't developed yet. Their bodies maybe haven't developed yet. So in order to, this is to protect kids. How is this a moral breakdown? This makes no sense what he's saying.
And it shows that, in fact, you can't be trusted to do the right thing. You can't be trusted to make the distinction between who is a mature person and who is an immature person.
Well, I guess you can't trust Muslims either, because according to Islamic law, if you cheat on your wife, you have to be killed. You see how that works, buddy? It goes both ways. It cuts both ways.
Someone who is actually a vulnerable, inexperienced child from someone who is, a responsible person with full cognition and agency. Even though we all know that there are people who are younger than 18 who are more mature than some 30-year-olds. And there are some 30-year-olds who are less mature than teenagers. But okay, you need a standard. You need some help on that issue because apparently your own sense isn't sufficient.
Well, obviously it isn't. Because if it was enough, we wouldn't need laws like this. The fact is, without these laws, right, you have people taking advantage of children, old men taking advantage of young women. Why do you think we have these laws? And in fact, these laws exist in Muslim countries too. We're going to get into that.
What isn't sufficient. And apparently you can't be trusted to raise your own children right or to protect them properly from predators. And then because...
Well, we've also seen that not all parents are able to protect their children from predators. Some parents are predators themselves, right? Like, this guy, he's acting so intellectual. He's trying to sound intellectual and deep, but he's making the most stupidest points. Like, where's his brains? Obviously, we need laws to protect children because if we didn't, we can't just trust people. There's bad people out there, right? And again, his whole critique, it sounds like he's an anarchist, right? Like I don't believe in laws or something, but Islam is even worse than that. Islam is even more harsh. So what are you saying, man?
Because you legalized fornication. You decided that sex outside of marriage is moral now. Then you had to decide on a legal age of consent. And then you had to figure out what you're supposed to do when someone who's above the legal age of consent has sex with someone who's below the legal age of consent. And then you also had to figure out what to do when two people who are under the age of consent have sex with each other. Basically, you had to figure out all the rules for fornication.
Yeah, we had to figure out all the rules because we want to protect children. These rules are there for a reason, like I keep saying.
And of course, all of this is arbitrary. But throughout most of the West, none of that applies to marriage, because you still have child marriage throughout the Western world, the same as everywhere else. I mean, child marriage is legal in almost half of the states in America.
Okay, so he's actually wrong here, and I'm going to show you why that is. So he's actually spreading misinformation here. So first of all, obviously, as time goes by, the age is getting higher and higher, the age of consent. So there's two different ages to keep in mind. There's the age of consent, which is when, you can actually have sex legally. And then there's the marriage age. And these two things are different. You can actually get married in some of these states before you can actually you're still below the age of consent, which means you're married, but you can't consummate the marriage, or you may be breaking the law and you can be charged for rape. So as you can see here, the age actually goes based on the state. There's different states. Each one has a different age. but the minimum marriage age is different. Sometimes it's younger than the age of consent, right? So when you look at this, you can see that it depends from state to state, right? There are different states. Some of them are younger and some are older. But the thing is, the age of consent still doesn't go below 16. And even when it does, now this is one of the things he was criticizing, there's a maximum age difference. So if you are basically 16 years old, right, and you're, in a relationship with a man that's older than that, or a woman, the maximum age difference is 3 years. So Muhammad, under this, would be breaking the law because he's 53 with a 6-year-old. So obviously that's not allowed. So this sort of situation is not allowed. We're talking about when there's two kids, two young people in love, in a relationship. This is how it's dealt with. So there's some nuance here. So he was there complaining about nuance and there's no nuance, but there's a lot of nuance here. The nuance is that even if you get married, it still may be illegal if you're under 18, if there's a significant age difference, right? And it's a criminal offense. Okay, so even if you are married, and this is important because it's not always the case that parents will take care of their children. You may have a situation where a parent puts a child into a dangerous relationship for whatever reason. Maybe there's some benefits to them, right?
In some states you need parental consent, and in some states there's not even a minimum age. It's the same in Europe. Parental consent, almost half of the states in America. In some states you need parental consent, and in some states, there's not even a minimum age. It's the same in Europe. So you don't want adults and minors to fornicate with each other, but it's okay if they marry each other. That's your position. I mean, there's been about 500,000 marriages between adults and minors in the United States.
Yeah, as I clearly said, even if they get married below the age of consent, they still have to wait until the age of consent, unless they're within a few years of each other, right?
Just the last couple of decades. So basically, the age of consent, the legal age of adulthood, is only really relevant in terms of the legalities surrounding fornication, because you don't actually have an issue with child marriage. It's legal throughout, we can say, most of the West, or at least half or 3/4 of the West has no problem with child marriage.
Again, that's not true. That's misrepresenting the situation, and that's switching up the goalpost, because actually, again, even if the marriage was allowed, you could still be charged under those laws if there's too much of an age gap, or you don't wait until you're 18 to consummate the marriage. So it's not true. Child marriage is not encouraged and is generally being, aged out of the country. Even when there is child marriage, it's between two children, two kids together, not an old man and a young woman. But he's trying to make it seem like this whole thing is about something that it's not. And he's trying to mix up facts together, and the data doesn't match what he's saying.
But we all know that you're much more interested in fornication than you're interested in marriage. So when you talk about the marriage of Rasulullah ﷺ to Aisha, you're looking at it from the sexual angle. Even though this was a marriage, and you have legal marriage in your societies between adults and minors, what you're looking for from us, this is what you're up to. What you're looking for from us is a defense, a moral defense for sex between adults and minors. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to trick us into normalizing pedophilia for you. Because when you bring up Aisha, you know that Muslims will jump to explain that she was menstruating. She was physically, biologically mature enough for intercourse. And we'll explain how this kind of a marriage was perfectly normal in traditional societies and has been historically all the way up until really the 20th century.
Yeah, well, first of all, being able to menstruate is not the only indicator of adulthood, and it's not sufficient in order to necessarily get involved with intercourse. That's not enough. That's just one thing, and sometimes that can be triggered early based on, for example, sexual assault, right? That could be triggered based on bad health, right? There's a lot of reasons why that can happen. Doesn't mean it's an ideal outcome. Like, what a joke. He's the one with the prophet that did this thing with a child, and we're the ones that want to legalize and normalize pedophilia, even though the laws in America, I'm just using America as an example, clearly do not allow this sort of situation that happened. Clearly do not. And we should look at this tweet here, which also kind of misses the point. This guy, Farid, said, "I love how so many of these Islamophobes don't have the ability to represent me fairly by calling this child rape. How is it child rape when there's parental consent? Parental consent can still be there for it to be rape. Like, it's not, that doesn't go away just because the parents consented. The child, it's a child. If it's a child, by default, you cannot, be involved with them in that way. So yeah, this is ridiculous that people don't understand this. Just because it's a marriage does not make it automatically okay. Does not make it okay if she's a child. It is not. And by definition of this, by this definition, if you get married to a child and you consummate that marriage, that's rape, because the child cannot consent by definition, because they're not old enough, they're not mature, right?
And we'll provide you with all of the arguments that you need to make it okay for you to have sex with children. That's what you really want. That's why you talk about it. You're outsourcing the task of justifying pedophilia to the Muslims so that you can use those arguments to rationalize fornicating with children.
Oh, how is it that it's oh so easy to do that? To go to the Islamic text and to justify these things. Why is that? Why is it that this makes a job? If that was a goal, how is it that Islam is helping in that goal? Like, does this guy have any brain cells at all? Like this so-called intellectual dude? He's admitting that this is problematic and we're using Islam because, well, Islam makes it easy because it has all of these problems in it.
That's all it can be. Because like I said, you have legal child marriages in the West. So you're just interested in the sex part because, again, you have decided collectively that what used to only be allowed between married people should also be allowed between unmarried people. You decided that sex inside of marriage and outside of marriage are equally valid. So now you want to apply that to sex between adults and minors because it's obviously okay inside of a marriage by your own laws, most of Europe and most of the West. So it should also be okay outside of marriage. That's what you're up to. But no, sorry. We're not going to normalize pedophilia for you. In Islam, we do.
The problem is you already have. This is exactly what happened because of this marriage. This has been used by Muslim scholars for centuries to justify child marriage. There's no minimum age in Islam for marriage or for consummating the marriage because of this. Because this thing happened.
Do not allow marriage between a mature person and an immature person. And maturity isn't exclusively physical or biological. Aisha was not comparable to anyone her age. Not in her time period and not now.
Ah, she was a grown-up child. Oh, that makes it much better. She was this intellectual child prodigy. She's so special that she was exceptionally, she was so special that Muhammad alone had the ability to do the woogie boogie with her. Like, that's your argument, dude? Are you like, these people, they take us for idiots. They literally take us for idiots. They think we're stupid. But like, maybe some people are stupid and like actually agree with this stuff. And maybe it sounds good. And if you're in the cult, you're just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But like, what kind of points are these?
She was a remarkable human being. She was a remarkable person. She's what today you would call a prodigy. She was an exception in every conceivable way. Strong, mature, gifted, with extraordinary character and wisdom.
So what was she doing in Muhammad's bed then? Shouldn't she be out there doing like exceptional things like, like inventing algebra or something? Like what is this? Instead, she was like this, like...
Maryam, the mother of Isa, alayhi salam. Mary, the mother of Jesus. She was an anomaly.
Okay, so I'm going to show you something. Interestingly, when Muhammad wanted to marry Aisha, actually, Abu Bakr, her dad, was reluctant. he said, "You're my brother. Like, you want to marry my daughter? You're my brother, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, but she's lawful for me." So that's interesting, first of all. Second of all, we've seen this. Everyone knows this. But there's a lot more indications that she actually was a child. This says qablul bulugh, before maturity, right? And it says over here in the seerah that as for Aisha, when he married her, she was very young and not yet ready for consummation. So, yeah, like, this is like, the excuses don't stop, eh? They just don't stop.
Obviously, she was physically mature. She was menstruating when she married Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but she was also psychologically, emotionally, and intellectually mature. She's one of the...
At the age of 9. So at least when people try to say she's 18, there's like an argument to be made there. But like, he's not even saying that. He's trying to make it sound like she's some like child genius or something. And you know, actually, what he was saying about how historically this was allowed in different societies, this is also sort of hand waving, and it's not totally true. Okay, and like, for example, I looked it up. I'm not going to give you citations, but I looked it up. Ancient Rome, there was no strict legal minimum. However, they were typically married in their early teens. Aisha wasn't even a teen, right? In ancient Greece, it was again early teens usually, while boys a little bit later. So girls early teens, boys a little bit later. Ancient Egypt, again, after they reach puberty, usually around 12 or 13, boys a little bit later, in the teens. Ancient China, around 15 to 16 for girls, boys a little bit later, in the early teens or early 20s. Sorry, late teens or early 20s. Ancient India is problematic. It goes age 7 or 8. Okay, but again, it says it depends on the area and stuff like that. Boys usually later, in the late teens. Ancient Mesopotamia, the minimum age was around puberty, with boys a few years later. So this did vary from society to society, but it doesn't matter because we know better. We know based on the data, based on the science, that this is harmful for young women and we shouldn't allow it. It's that simple. We should not allow this thing. We don't need to say, oh, it was allowed. It was always allowed, so we have to allow it. No, even if it was always allowed, it could have still been bad.
The greatest scholars and jurists in Islamic history. This was not an average human being. And beyond that, she was not marrying an average human being. And her parents weren't average. There is nothing in this scenario that applies to, some guy in the Netherlands who wants to have sex with a child. There's a complex architecture in Islam around...
I'm pretty sure this pedophile guy that you mentioned is not using Islam as a justification. Neither is he using Western child protection laws as a justification. You're talking about, people that are basically breaking the law. Did you hear that? They're breaking the law. This is illegal.
Marriage. And all of it has to be in place for it to be valid, in order for it to be approved. You can't just look at the age of Aisha and conclude from that, oh, it's okay, it's fine to marry a minor. Much less it's okay to have sex with a minor outside of marriage. No. Contracting marriage in Islam is an elaborate procedure. It's like a math problem. You can't skip any steps and get the same outcome. Again, this is your problem in the West.
This is a complex math problem to get married as a Muslim. You need 2 witnesses and ijab and qabul. That's it, and a dowry, right? A mahar. What do you mean complex math problem? This guy, I'm starting to think he's just lying. Maybe he just likes the sound of his voice. Marriage in Islam is not a complex math problem that requires all sorts of things. It's very simple. Even worse than that, you don't even need to get married in Islam to have sex. You can have a slave, a prisoner of war. You can buy and sell slaves on the market. You do not have to have a nikah with them. You can literally do what you want with them. It's in the Quran, Surah Mu'minun, right? Those protect their private parts except from those the right hands possess. So, again, either he's lying or he's just likes the sound of his voice and just thinks he's smart. But like, you don't even, none of those protections exist in Islam, because you can literally just, first of all, it's easy to get married. There's no rules, there's no minimum age, there's no laws like that, except in Muslim countries nowadays there are minimum age laws. But under Islamic theology, there's no laws like that to protect young women.
You want to take some things and then leave other things. You oversimplify. And in doing so, you skip over all of the requirements that make something valid. But
what are the requirements? What are the requirements? There are no requirements. Not even marriage is a requirement if you own her.
You still want the thing to be valid. It doesn't work that way. And because you are so far removed from normal human understanding, you think that if something is allowed under very specific, very unique conditions, it means it's just allowed, period. No.
Ah, interesting. So now he's saying this is a very special, very unique circumstance. Aisha was a very unique circumstance, not for everyone. Interesting. Where's the proof for that? Where's the proof that this was a special, unique circumstance and not for anyone else? There is none. There's none. In fact, in the Quran, there's a verse that talks about divorcing those that haven't had a period yet, which you have had intercourse with. Chapter 65, verse 4, right there. Now, some of the translators will make it sound like it's talking about old women, but it's not necessarily talking about old women, because it could be also talking about those who are not yet menstruating, yet you're not sure if they're pregnant, right? Meaning like you've done it with them, right? So you can see how problematic this is. There's no, what he's saying doesn't fit. It just doesn't.
No Muslim father is going to approve for his daughter to marry someone when she's not physically or emotionally or psychologically ready for that. Do you think we don't love our children? You can't come to a Muslim man and ask to marry his primary school age daughter by telling him that the Prophet married Aisha at that age. He'll beat you within an inch of your life. No, sorry.
Well, then that makes him better than Abu Bakr. That makes him better than the Prophet, because he's actually behaving more righteously, more maturely, more kindly to his daughter than even these people did, and even Muhammad and Abu Bakr did.
No, sorry. You can't use us to rationalize your kinks and fetishes and sexual deviance.
Well, it sounds like this was like your Prophet that did this. How are you putting this on us? Oh, God. Sometimes people, they just say stupid things with like confidence and people just believe them. It's just like, you can just say the most stupidest thing with confidence and people will believe you. And this is what's happening here. Like, okay, I want to show you something.
If my daughter, if my daughter wants to menstruation, hold on, let me finish. If my daughter reached the age of menstruation at 9 years old, I would say you are ready. One second, you are ready to get married.
So I guess he's wrong about that. Although, to be fair, he could be right. He could actually be right that some Muslim dads would be that way, probably majority. But not all of them. I mean, this has been a problem in the Muslim world for a long time. Marriage reform has been coming from country to country.
We know that maturity levels vary among young people. It varies from culture to culture, from upbringing to upbringing, from family to family, and from individual to individual.
And still, there would be no harm in delaying that till 18. You're a young lady that hasn't grown up, that hasn't reached 18. She's not losing anything by waiting 2 more years to get married till she's 18 instead of 16 or 14 or, God forbid, 9, 6.
And we don't force upon our understanding a fixed age that arbitrarily demarcates adulthood, because we have a whole moral, ethical, and legal architecture around marriage to ensure that everyone's rights are safeguarded.
Not really. Where are the woman's rights in a marriage when a man can just say talak and divorce her after waiting a few, like 30 days or whatever? Where's her rights that she has no right? She cannot do that, but a man can do that.
And as for sex outside of marriage, well, obviously that's not even an option in Islam.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Did you forget Malakat Aymanukum? Those your right hand possesses?
But none of this applies to you. None of this applies to your culture. You don't have that architecture. You don't have those safeguards and protections. You don't have our system. And of course,
So what do we have then? We have a minimum age law. We have this maximum difference age laws. We have minimum age of consent laws, age of majority laws. And according to you, we don't have that protection in our system. What do you have in your system? You have literally no protection, zero protection, except for what maybe the parent, if you have good parents. That's it.
you don't raise your children the way we do. I mean, a 9-year-old boy in Gaza is more of a man than a 25-year-old in America. You prolong adolescence to an absurd degree.
Yeah, because we don't want our kids being, going. Do I even need to say this? Like, he's trying to make it sound like it's a good thing what's happening in Gaza right now with like little kids throwing rocks at police and tanks, running after them and whatever. Like, yo, is that what you want your kids to do at 9 years old? No, that's not what I want. I want my kids to have a childhood, for God's sake. For spaghetti God's sake, because I don't believe in God.
You don't prioritize maturity, but at the same time, you sexualize your children very early.
You know what? So to me, allowing a child to be married at 6 actually, that's what you're doing. That's not what we're doing. But he's going to go on and criticize certain things that happen in Western society. He's going to try to make it sound like all of Western society is bad because these things are happening right now. And even then, conservatives don't agree with these things. Both Christians and obviously Muslims, but Christians too, and obviously even atheists, like conservatives don't, even liberals don't agree with a lot of these things.
I mean, you've got like 3rd graders twerking, and singing explicit song lyrics, and then you put that on social media for everyone to see. You're teaching kindergartners about sex, masturbation, about homosexuality and transgenderism. You think that prepubescent children can decide to have their genitals removed before they even know what they're actually for. You put little girls in beauty contests and try to turn them into, miniature Beyoncés and Cardi B's singing.
Yeah, this does happen in the West, and obviously not, I wouldn't agree with all of these things. It also happens in the Muslim world with like belly dancing. Kids do belly dancing, and from what I understand, they don't see that as sexual. They don't see that like that. Just like people here don't see beauty pageants as sexual, but some people do, and that's why they don't do it. I personally wouldn't involve my kids in that. So,
singing about WAP, you need a specific age of consent, and it should be high. It should probably be somewhere in the 20s. In the Muslim world, psychological and emotional maturity is developed as close as possible to physical maturity.
So get them married young, get them breeding young. That's what he's saying. Don't let them be kids. Get them while they're young. Get them while they're physically mature. And then get them trapped into these probably toxic relationships, toxic marriages with a much older man. Not an equal, not someone of similar age, way older man.
So when someone is biologically capable of procreation, they should be mentally and psychologically capable of the responsibilities that go along with that. And if they're not capable, then marriage is out of the question. Again, Muslim parents know their children. They love their children. They want what's best for their children. And I would say that we know.
Yeah, I would say that too. But the problem is you have these religious teachings that allow you to circumvent. Like, look at Abu Bakr. Seems like he didn't want Muhammad to marry his daughter, but he's still went ahead and did it. The religion allows these things, right? You cannot leave protection of children to just the parents. That's why we have laws for consistency across different parents. Not all parents are good parents, man.
Know and love our children and care for our children better than Westerners, who very often don't even know what their kids are getting up to. I mean, 12%, I saw a study, 12% of 12-year-olds in the U.S. are already sexually active at 12. And that's from a study 10 years ago. So you can expect that the percentage is even higher now. 6.5% of them had actually already engaged in anal sex by the age of 12. The majority of sex offenders in the West victimize children.
Yeah, and you don't think that Muslim parents are any different? You don't think that Muslim kids don't do these things? I have news for you, buddy. Okay? Like, I have news for you. If you think Muslim kids don't do any of that stuff, boy, you need to learn. And this guy has kids too, but he thinks he's I don't know what bubble he's living in. I really don't know what bubble he's living in. Nobody says this is a good thing either.
And they say about 90% of sexual assaults on children are never even reported. So imagine what the real numbers are. No, you have a pedophilia problem in the West. And no matter how much you wish you could, you can't shift that over to us. We're not going to help you justify your sickness.
Yeah, well, the difference is in our society, it's illegal. And you go to jail. In your, I don't want to say society, in your worldview, it's okay as long as it's in a marriage. As long as that's her husband, it doesn't matter whether he's 45 and she's 12. It doesn't matter. Because everyone's different and everyone matures sooner or later. And she menstruated. She's ready. She menstruated. She's ready for marriage, according to you. And you're saying we're the ones that have a pedophilia problem? I don't think so. You got it. Oh, man. I'm like cringing so much at this guy. This pseudo-intellectual here.
Islam does not approve of this. The Sharia does not approve of this. The Prophet's marriage to Aisha did not give you or anyone else a rationale for preying on vulnerable children.
Yes, it does. That's the problem. That's why we're discussing this shit, because it literally created this problem in Muslim societies where Muslim scholars would argue that, are you better than the Prophet? Jonathan Brown said the same thing when talking about slavery. Are you better than the Prophet? How can you say it's wrong, slavery? If Prophet did it, then obviously you are not better than him. But that's the problem. He's a perfect man. You can't get out of this. You cannot. You're trapped. It's a checkmate. Like he said, silver bullet. Yeah, well, there's bigger problems than this, but this is actually a big problem you cannot solve easily.
Because that's not what that marriage was. That marriage demonstrates the specialness of Aisha, the maturity of Aisha. And it showed us that anomalies can exist when someone is remarkably mature for their age. So we acknowledge the possibility. We acknowledge that that's a thing that can happen. And we have a system for gauging that.
Yeah, the system for gauging whether you can marry a child is she's a genius. She's very mature. She knows algebra. Well, apparently Aisha didn't know algebra, but like whatever the hell he's talking about, she's very mature. Maybe she talks about having kids. And let's get her pregnant. Let's get her married and pregnant. Yeah, that's what this guy's saying.
And we have the sense on how to gauge that. And this has nothing to do with people who are attracted to minors. Rasulullah.
You know, this is the problem. That this is like a gateway to people that are attracted to minors, because under Islam, all you got to do is convert to Islam. It's totally halal. Now, of course, thankfully, in most of the Muslim world, it's illegal. So it's, even though it might be halal, it's not actually allowed and you could still go to jail or whatever. But it still happens. There's people like 100-year-olds, 70-year-olds marrying like people way younger than them in the Muslim world, especially in like, let's say in the backwaters or the back deserts of, you know, Saudi or whatever, you know, they'll get away with it, right? Or like Yemen or whatever, Afghanistan. And a lot of it is connected to poverty as well, right? Obviously with poverty, child marriage happens a lot too. But the point is that your system allows this, right? The problem is in your backer, not in ours. We've condemned this. We've condemned it we've made it illegal. We've locked it down. Not in your situation.
Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam wasn't attracted to minors. He had multiple wives, and all of them were older, previously married women. Aisha was the exception because she was exceptional. And from that example, from their marriage, we understood that exceptions can exist.
I do sort of agree with him here, sort of, in the sense that like he did have other wives. This was she was an exception in that she was exceptionally young, like exceptionally young. But a lot of his other wives were pretty young too, 17 and 16 and 20 and whatever, right? Like they're all different ages, right? And so obviously he was marrying for many different reasons, you know, to secure partnerships with other people and make allies and blah, 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 connect the different tribes. They did marriage for those reasons back then, right? So obviously there is a point here to be made, but, you know, there's still a problem in that this has enabled a whole slew of bad things to happen. This marriage, it's just been terrible for humanity. Because of who did it. It's just not a nobody. It's a special man to Muslims.
Very young people can be exceptionally mature, and they are treated then accordingly. But people who are specifically attracted to minors are usually attracted to minors precisely because they are immature, they are vulnerable, and they can be manipulated and abused and exploited, and that's what those types of people want to do. And you know, in this region, in Southeast Asia, everyone knows about Western sex tourists who come over here specifically to target children. You're notorious for that, especially in Thailand or the Philippines, places like this, Vietnam. Germans, British, Americans, I mean, everyone holds their kids close when they see you all over here.
Interesting. No Arabs, no Muslims, no people from Dubai or Saudi or anything like that. Well, I guess over there they can get kids already, right? Just because you have criminals engaging in criminal behavior, it is criminal behavior. If these people were caught, they'd go to jail. That does not mean the system of law in the West is bad. Like, what kind of point is that? Shitty people exist, therefore the West is terrible. What a clown.
The same way that you hold your kids close when you see a priest. Sexual predation against children has a long history in Europe, all the way back to the Roman Empire. You have a pedophilia problem, and you always have. And that's exactly why you needed to set an age of consent in the first place, to try to control that problem.
So you agree that it's a good thing, and you also said that it should be in his 20s. Therefore, Islam shouldn't look at Muhammad as a perfect man. This was no exception. If it was an exception, it wasn't explicitly stated as an exception, so this is a weak point. The fact is, he just did something that was common that people did back then, which was bad. So he's not the perfect human.
But you never cured the problem itself in your society. So now, you're actually trying to find ways to get out of those controls that you set. So you want the Muslims to give you a way by explaining the marriage of Aisha according to your framework, according to your context, but it does not apply. In Islam, there is no sex outside of marriage, there is no marriage without consent, and there is no consent without maturity. And if that is ever violated, then it is invalid in the religion, it is invalid in the law, and that would only ever be done by people who are either ignorant or irreligious. So you want to cite an example from our history so that you can justify removing the safeguards and conditions that prevent preying on children. But the marriage of Aisha radiallahu anha to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam affirms those safeguards and conditions. So that last stone that you have to throw at us, you know, what you think is that silver bullet when you've got nothing else to say to try to discredit Islam, those accusations just boomerang back around and indict yourselves.
Oh my goodness, that was painful to listen to. The points he made, the pseudo-intellectual guy, the guy just kept making bad points, and he tries to make this, you know, I'm just going to project this entire problem that we have in Islam back on the West. This guy hates the West. He hates, you know, the country of his birth. He hates our entire system, our way of life, because he's an Islamist. He is trouble, and I would hope that, you know, I made the point well, that this arguments he's making, the pseudo-intellectual arguments, are garbage. He has no points. He literally has no points. Like, this is just like a complete straw man, right? This is just confidently lying or just saying bullshit in front of a camera, trying to sound smart and intellectual. The West is whatever. to try to convince Muslims that, yeah, religion's good, its system is good, yeah, don't worry about it, right? I mean, most of this is to convince Muslims, let's be honest, right? Because non-Muslims are not going to be convinced by this crap, right? Especially with this antagonistic sort of way of talking, right? So anyways, I hope Muslims that watch this are convinced otherwise, that this wasn't good, these weren't good points. And just want to say thank you to my patrons for your continued support. I really appreciate all of you. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. It helps the algorithm. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Subscribe if you're new here. This is your friendly ex-Muslim Abdullah Samir, signing out.